we want to talk about what those arrangements can be and what decisions we need to make, and whether we make them or not, they occur in terms of asking ourselves, what happens when we experience these rapid changes in how we do things, right? Social norms in a community, or who's with us in the community, how people are changing, who they are, what their norms are, how these demographics change in a community. There are a number of experts that have looked at defining what this means for a community when this happens. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. When these punctuated changes happen, often it produces collective anxiety. How many of you know what that looks like in your work and in your communities, right? And that collective anxiety can look like unconscious bias. It can lead to segregation, isolation, increases distrust. And with that, this happens because we are in the process as a community that is shifting and asking ourselves, who will we become? Who will we become as a result of these changes? And there are experts that have been working on helping communities to answer this question about an emerging identity. And I think it's of value to say that that question is at the forefront, and we don't get to choose that it is. It just is, which means that whether we decide or think we're answering or not, we're answering it. We're answering it with our culture. We're answering it with our work. We're answering it. And so there's an opportunity that when these rapid changes happen, we can ask ourselves, what do we want to result from this? What do we want to result when anxieties come up about what will this community look like for my children? Will my landlord discriminate against me because of what I look like? What will happen to my property value? These are real anxieties and forms of bias that we know. We may not say it, we may not always have conversations about it, but they do inform how people are responding to change. And when we have these forms of fear, anxiety, it leads to distrust. It's hard to trust people. It's hard to collaborate in genuine ways that create robust collaborations. And in the end, it leads leadership. So that's us here and many of the people who are not here, who are leading in organizations, leading on Staten Island in different ways. We, as leadership, in whatever capacity, whether it's informal or formal, are in a community and influencing the story that gets told about change. And we get to influence that story and help people or teach people how to understand that change. And the strategic narrative of change that gives meaning to action and culture can often work to do two things. It can work to break or to bridge. And I want to say that when communities and leaders in communities work in a way that break ties, it makes sense to me because it's a lot easier to break than to bridge. I think it's important to say that as human beings, the machinery of our mind tells us to go with what's familiar, to go with what makes me comfortable. And so it doesn't always happen in intentional ways, but it happens more commonly that we break than bridge. And when we talk about breaking, it's a response. It's a way that we respond that often creates social ties in exclusivity, and that also pushes away other groups who are seen as dangerous or a threat. And so when we're breaking, the result of that kind of breaking in response is that, we often turn inward. People turn inward. They turn inward to their silos, to their specific cliques, or to their specific areas of people of comfort. And it creates fragile coalitions. It creates tenuous alignments, perpetuates oppressive systems of extreme isolation, toxic politics, and all kinds of forms of systemic inequity. And I'm sure that many of you are shaking your head and saying, yeah, I've experienced that kind of breaking. and I've been in that in some way, form, or fashion. And breaking beliefs and behaviors often convey messages that we are familiar with. You know, this is an invasion. I don't know what to do with all these people coming in. And we may not say it, but people are grappling with these fears and anxieties in ways that language themselves. We need to preserve our legacy. Safe neighborhood. We're losing ground, right? There are ways that we respond that are not bridging, but breaking. And again, I want to say that's because bridging is harder. It's counterintuitive. And Bell Hooks says it best when she says that, you know, bridges get, right? And being a bridge is counterintuitive. When we bridge, we actually create social ties that link people together across a sharp division that typically divides a community. So we say to ourselves that the complexity of diversity is a gift and a given. It's here, and there's also some things that we can really gain and learn and leverage and honor about this diversity. And it's here. And it also asks us, when we're bridging, we're asking ourselves, like, who are the unexpected people, allies, surprising partners, unfamiliar co-creators that may be able to do this work in creating.
I'm not sure. Paul, are you hearing Myra? I think she might have gone out for a moment.
Yeah, I think she broke up.
We're not, you know, none of us are here, Sharmila, Paul, myself, Alexa, to create this utopian invitation that this is just, we're all just gonna just be perfect and get along. It's really to anticipate and say, yeah, this is hard work to bridge, but it's also worth it. And the alternative is just not acceptable. We can't create community. We can't.
Yeah, I think she might have had a connection issue.
Yeah, she'll be back. So what she's really talking about is, you can keep moving. What Myra is talking about is the fact that we're at this point where we need to decide, okay, how do we want to shape equity and belonging? How do we want it to look like? So as you can see from this diagram, there's the three areas, right? You have what exclusion looks like, and you could take a moment to kind of, you know, imagine that, think about it, where you lie in that exclusion diagram. And then as we're moving into more of an integration, is what people talk about. What does being integrated look like? And then finally moving over to an area of belonging. So it's this discussion of belonging, and one of the things we talk about is that we would need to really come up with a common language and how we all define it. And that's what's getting us into the discussion about the survey, because we all may have a different connotation of what that means. So it's more than just a feeling of being included, right? It's really about being allowed to be healthy and being able to thrive and increase one's that your well-being is not just thought about in times, that it's continuously considered, and so that everything in the design in the area where you are has meaning to you. So you're a part of the structures and the institutions. You're just a real part of that discussion. So when you think in terms of the whole equality,
Hello?
yes, there you go.
Hi, I'm not sure what happened.
That's okay. These are our new problems in this connected world that we're in.
I started carrying it for you.
I'm not sure what happened. Clearly, thank you. Clearly, my internet access is not bridging well. So I apologize. I didn't know what. That's never happened. So sharing with them about the blueprint, right? for equity and belonging. Yep. What was that? Is that what you were?
Yeah,
talking
that's where Paul picked up
okay,
on.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. So, you know, the focus of bridging and wanting to be an entity that can bridge on Staten Island is really what's informed the blueprint for the Equity and Belonging Project. And belonging is a construction that, you know, we're striving for as a community. And when communities foster belonging, they create inclusive spaces that see all of its members as inside the circle of humanity. And I think I want to just share that Sharmila said something about someone in her cohort who shared an insightful realization about the distinction between belonging and inclusion, right? And he said, you know, I've come to realize, you know, it's better to find belonging than it is to struggle to fit in. And I thought that was such a profound way of encapsulating the difference between the two, that it makes a lot of sense that true belonging tells us something fundamental about how groups are structurally positioned within a society and how well and how understood and regarded people are. So it has an affective, emotional piece as well as an embodied piece. It's how people experience us, but how we experience people experiencing us, right? And so when we talk about the path of co-creating and co-owning structures to belong, we also need to address structural inequities that create barriers to full belonging. And so equity becomes, you know, the conduit, if you will, that fosters belonging. And many of you have seen this image on the right that I have up. You know, this is an attempt at understanding equity. It has its limitations. You know, some people have talked about how it's a limited visual. There even shouldn't be a wall that separates the circle of humanity. And I hear that. What I do want to use it is as a starting point for us to ask ourselves, how can what we can agree on is that the problem is not an inherent deficit to the community themselves, the people, that it's not about their height, right? It's not about who they are. It's within the structures around them. And as a social worker, as I'm gonna put myself in the mix and say, we generally pay way too much attention to transactional solutions. So what we're gonna give, what service we're gonna provide, we're gonna provide, you know, there's a lot of transactional resources being exchanged, but not enough focus spent on the role of structures in actually shaping the inequity that we see in the outcomes of a community. And we need to do that better, because structural forces are really the key forces that shape inequitable outcomes that we see today. So whether it's racial or economic segregation or concentrated poverty, these structural factors are what we need to be thinking about when we think about creating change. So when we're considering racial disparities or social inequities experienced by, you know, POC, immigrants, LGBTQ+, people living with economic insecurity, people with disabilities, how do we create equitable policies that bridge instead of break? And I want us to hold that question. How do we do that? And because that's the question that we've been asking ourselves as we develop the process for moving forward. And the following window is, the following visual is a window into the long-term process of the Equity and Belonging Project. We are not wide-eyed and utopian in our vision of doing this work. We understand that this is for the long term. We want to continue, and Sharmila has done an excellent job of talking to us about the importance of continuing to seek funding and to continue to seek how to build on this year project. This year in particular, for this year, we are looking to build a network of powerful community organizations, businesses, and community groups that can gather insights, from diverse community leaders so that we can develop a strategic meta-narrative for equity and belonging on Staten Island, right? So what is the overarching story that we want to tell and work from about equity and belonging? And how does it inform how we lead? And so we want to develop that together. And the project will undertake that in a range of important activities that will be used to create this capacity.